UFC Austin betting and DraftKings breakdown. We've got 14 fights this Saturday. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's get into it. Kicking things off, we have the first of a couple Philadelphia fighters. We have my guy Kyle Daukaus coming in as a sizable favorite at minus 240. The comeback on Roman Dolidze is plus 195. And I really think Kyle Daukaus kind of just has Dolidze covered here. In my article on fightnumbers.com this week, I basically said Dolidze is kind of the Walmart version of Kyle Daukaus. Daukaus should have him covered in the striking department. He's the much better submission grappler as well. You know, we like Dolidze in the sense when he was fighting at these bigger weight classes, you know, he's athletic, he has power, he's aggressive with his grappling in a division that not many people can grapple. But at the middleweight division, none of those things really go in his favor. And like I said, Kyle Daukaus is better in basically every one of those areas. I think he's a better boxer. He's certainly got better cardio. He's got better fight IQ, which is a big red flag on the Dolidze side. So in a fight where I think Daukaus is going to be winning the minutes standing, he throws more volume. He's much more cleaner on the feet. And then in terms of the grappling, I expect him to be the one in dominant positions, threatening to finish. And if Dolidze death gasses like we've seen him do in the past, Daukaus is going to hunt for the finish here. So give me Daukaus. I think he's relatively safe on a week where a lot of these expensive fighters, there's a case to be made for the underdog. I don't really think this is one of those. And in terms of his safety, in terms of the betting market, I like Daukaus as a parlay piece this week. So give me Daukaus by decision, but a submission or a TKO stoppage would not surprise me. Next fight up, we have another middleweight bout. We have Phil Hawes coming in as a minus 255 favorite. The comeback on Deron Winn is plus 205. And this is one where we have two guys both coming from a collegiate wrestling background. Deron Winn, the more credentialed wrestler, but I suspect it's actually going to be Hawes who's able to dictate where this fight goes because he's the much bigger fighter and the much more physically imposing fighter, much more stronger in those clinch scenarios. So while I do think Winn has the potential to land a takedown or two here, I don't trust him to do much with those takedowns or to have the ability to land multiple takedowns for 15 minutes here. And a lot of times when we see guys who both respect the skill set of their opponent, so like I said, they're both high-level wrestlers, if they both respect that, then this turns into a boxing match. I strongly favor Philip Hawes in that scenario. Deron Winn, yes, he's going to come out there and just wing heavy right hands, but Phil Hawes is much cleaner. I think he's much more powerful. If this fight stays standing, mark my words, I think Phil Hawes knocks out Deron Winn here. So give me Phil Hawes by knockout. I do like my boy Deron Winn. It's just not the spot for him here in my opinion. So Phil Hawes by knockout, and he's another solid pick on DraftKings this week. Next fight up in the bantamweight division, we have Cody Stamann, one of the bigger favorites on the card at minus 550. The comeback on UFC veteran Eddie Wineland is plus 450. And this is one where I think Cody Stamann wins here, but I actually think there's a case to be made for the old man in Eddie Wineland. Not that I'm going to be betting him or even really having any exposure on DraftKings, depending on how many lineups I make, but I just think it's a clear fade in terms of DraftKings on Stamann, who's 9,500, the most expensive fighter on the slate. Historically, it's very hard for a fighter priced that high to be optimal as it is. And then you factor in Stamann isn't really a great DraftKings score. Yes, he does have the wrestling pedigree, comes from a collegiate wrestling background as well, like those other fighters we talked about earlier. But this is a matchup where I'd be surprised if he can string together like 5+ takedowns, and that's really what he needs, along with probably a finish to pay off that salary. Eddie Wineland historically has great takedown defense because he has that boxing stance. He keeps his hands very low, very good at defending first level takedowns. So I'd be surprised if I do think Stamann will be able to land a takedown or two. I just don't think he'll be able to do it consistently. So he's going to be giving up a little bit of reach here. I think the striking's somewhat competitive. I do still think he'll get his hand raised, but I just question the upside on DraftKings. So give me Stamann by decision, minus 120, not a terrible bet, but I do think there's at least a small case for Wineland if he can keep this fight standing. I just think it plays out much closer than these odds suggest. And up next, we have Gloria De Paula coming in as a minus 265 favorite. The comeback on Maria Oliveira is plus 215. And this is one that I'm not going to spend much time on at all because on a 14 fight slate, we have 28 fighters to choose from. I don't want really any action on this fight, whether it's in the betting market or on DraftKings, because I just see De Paula as a pretty big favorite, a fighter that I don't rate very highly, but I also have zero interest in backing the underdog in Maria Oliveira, who UFC debut was against Tabitha Ricci, clearly a showcase fight for Ricci. Why they even signed Oliveira, I'm not sure. She beat somebody who was making their pro debut. That was her win to get into the UFC. So pretty low level in general, kind of on both sides. Both women are primarily strikers. Neither of them can defend takedowns very well, but I also don't really think either of them are going to be looking to grapple much in this fight. So I think we see a 15-minute kickboxing match, one that De Paula probably edges on speed and power, but I have zero conviction in this, and at these odds, I just want no action in it. Next fight up in the featherweight division, we have Ricardo Ramos coming in as a minus 300 favorite. The comeback on Danny Chavez is plus 235, and this is my first bet of the night. I bet Danny Chavez at plus 250 for a unit just because I think this fight is going to be much more competitive than what this line is telling us here. I think Danny Chavez is a pretty good fighter in general, and Ricardo Ramos, yes, he's very talented, but he's one of those guys where you're just always wondering if he's ever going to put it all together. You know, one time out, he looks excellent, looks like a promising prospect. The next time out, it's like there's red flags everywhere. The fight IQ is always a concern. The durability is a concern as well. He's been knocked out in the first round 2 different times. And the cardio, you know, he tends to slow down as the fight goes on. So in a fight against Danny Chavez, who is similar in the sense that they're both low volume. They're both going to throw a lot of kicks, maybe some spinning stuff, especially on the Ramos side here. But I don't know if either guy's going to be able to proactively grapple here. Ramos probably more willing to take it to the mat, but Chavez historically has excellent takedown defense. So I think we're pretty much going to see a striking match. And yes, it might turn into a staring contest at times, but one that's going to be pretty close. I think Chavez is dangerous with the kicks. Like I said, I think both guys could hurt each other with the low calf kicks, but also the body kick, the head kick for Chavez. Like, I think those are in play here against a guy who is susceptible to them in Ramos. So I back Chavez, like I said, for a unit at plus 250 on the sense that I think this is probably closer to a pick'em. Probably Ramos a small favorite here. So I have to take the shot at plus 250 on Chavez. I think he's a live dog in what should be probably a low upside fight in terms of DraftKings, but I do think there's clear value on the underdog here in Chavez. And next fight up, we have the first of 2 welterweight fights on the card. We have Court McGee coming in as a small favorite now, minus 120. The comeback on Jeremiah Wells, another Philadelphia fighter, is plus 100. And I have to say, I strongly disagree with the big line movement in favor of Court McGee here. Court McGee actually opened as a small underdog here. Wells opened on FanDuel at like minus 156. I considered backing him there, which would have been terrible, but I'm willing to admit that to you guys here. Now I'm at the point where I'm just waiting. I haven't bet him yet. Potentially, this might be the biggest bet that I've ever made, it just depends how far the line moves in favor of Court McGee here, but I just really favor Jeremiah Wells in this spot. Yes, I agree that Court McGee is much more technically sound. He looked great against Ramiz Brahimaj, even showed off his wrestling, landed 5 takedowns in that fight. He's a guy that's historically very durable, very veteran savvy. He'll throw in high volume. He's never been submitted. He can hang in the grappling as well. When he is taken down, he can work back to his feet. Those are all great things. But on the flip side, he's going to be at a huge athleticism disadvantage against Jeremiah Wells, who's extremely explosive. He knocked out Warley Alves in the second round in his UFC debut, followed that up against Blood Diamond with the first round submission. He's 2-0 inside the octagon. I think that he's going to have a chance to hurt Court McGee early in this fight. I mentioned the durability of McGee. He's only been knocked out once in his career, but at 38 years old, it doesn't take much for us to start seeing that durability start to go. And against Sean Brady, who's a training partner of Jeremiah Wells, he was dropped once in that fight. Next fight, dropped by Carlos Condit. And yes, he was able to persevere through those. But I'm just saying, like, the writing's on the wall, I think, in terms of his durability. You know, once you start pushing 40, your durability doesn't get better. I think Jeremiah Wells has a real chance to hurt Court McGee on the feet, and all he does is throw with power, so we know he's going to bring it. And then in terms of the grappling, he's a high-level black belt. I think, yes, McGee's hard to control, but I also think a finish is possible on the mat for Jeremiah Wells because it's much different grappling against some of these other guys where he was able to work back to his feet, guys that are prioritizing control. He's going to do really well against. Jeremiah Wells, yes, he's got that control, but he's going to be hunting for a finish pretty aggressively and really doesn't care if he gives up control. So I just think it's going to be a different story than some of these other guys that McGee has faced. I think McGee's probably in trouble here, so I'm going to be backing Jeremiah Wells pretty aggressively in terms of the betting market. And then obviously on DraftKings, he's a few $100s cheaper, and I think he just has great upside for this slate. So give me Jeremiah Wells by knockout. He's getting it done for us this weekend. And up next, we have Jasmine Jasudavicius coming in as minus 240 favorite. The comeback on UFC newcomer Natalia Silva is plus 195. And this is another one where I just don't have a ton of interest here. I think Jasudavicius is the rightful favorite. I just question whether or not she can cover this type of price tag for somebody that's not an excellent striker. Yes, she does have a little bit of wrestling, but it's not like she's gonna, she's not Tatiana Suarez in there. I'll put it that way. So, and then Silva on the flip side, she's an aggressive striker. She's gonna throw, that's for sure, but she has pretty much no semblance of defense. She's been dropped on the regional scene. She has a ton of submissions, 7 submissions on her record. 6 of them are by armbar. So it's really just kind of comes down to Jasudavicius could be probably the better striker. She's going to be longer on the feet, fight behind her jab. She's better in the clinch. That's where she can have success here and really get a couple takedowns and really just try to stay safe in top position, avoid the arm bar. And I think she gets her hand race here, but it's another one where it's like, I expect her to win, but I just don't expect her to score well on DraftKings. So give me Jasudavicius by decision, but I'm not going to have much exposure on DraftKings this week. Next fight up, we have another bantamweight scrap, one that I think people are excited to see for multiple different reasons. Adrian Yanez comes in as a big favorite, minus 350. The comeback on Tony Kelly is plus 270. And this is another one, theme of the night, where I think this fight is going to be more competitive than these big betting odds suggest. And that goes with this fight as well, with Tony Kelly being a high volume striker. He's very durable. He's got decent cardio. He can push a pace for 15 minutes. We saw him persevere through that first round against Randy Costa and then take over in the second, get the finish himself. And then on the flip side, Adrian Yanez has been great in the UFC. He's got fast hands, solid boxing. Both of these guys are pretty hittable on the feet, but I just think Tony Kelly's a little bit more hittable, and I just expect Yanez to have the speed advantage, and he's a very good counter striker, and I think that's what's the difference here. So give me Yanez by decision. I don't necessarily think there's a ton of upside on DraftKings, but where I kind of talk down a few of the other expensive options, at least Yanez has that high floor in what should be a high-paced, high-volume type of fight. Next fight, we head back to the middleweight division where we have Gregory Rodriguez, a minus 170 favorite, going up against Julian Marquez. The comeback is plus 150. Marquez is always going to stick in my mind as the guy who blew his shot with Miley Cyrus. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, search Julian Marquez, Miley Cyrus on Google. You can get caught up to speed there. Totally dropped the ball. But anyway, in this matchup, I just really think Gregory Rodriguez is a much better minute winner against Julian Marquez, a guy who historically is finish reliant. All 9 of his wins have come inside the distance. He's reached the 3rd round in 3 fights. 2 of them went to decision. He lost both of those. The other one was against Maki Pitola, a fight that he was likely going to lose a decision, but he got a 3rd round finish there. So it's really just the finish that you need to worry about here. Yes, he has power on the feet. He's also a pretty decent grappler as well. But on the flip side, Rodriguez is super athletic, super powerful himself, and he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, probably the stronger grappler, I would think, as well. So it's kind of just going to be, can Marquez clip him on the feet? And yes, Rodriguez has been hurt standing before. He's been knocked out as well on Contender Series a couple years ago. But outside of that, I really think Rodriguez probably has him covered here. It just comes down to, is he not going to pull a stunt? So give me Rodriguez. I think this is a really good fight to target on DraftKings, though, because if Rodriguez does blow it, Marquez is going to score well. We know he's going to finish here. And then if Rodriguez does win, I think he could probably land a couple takedowns if he wants to. I wouldn't rule out a finish for him either. So I like the upside on both of these guys, but I think Rodriguez gets the job done on Saturday. And do me a favor before we move on to the next fight, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as I continue to bring you more UFC content each and every week. Next fight up, we have Damir Ismagulov, a minus 160 favorite. The comeback on Guram Kutaladze is plus 140. There's no one worse than fair weather fans in any sport than the UFC. And one prime example of that is Damir Ismagulov, who people were like championing, who people were like championing as this next world-class contender prospect. Oh, we got to give him a step up in competition. He never gets tested. He's going to run through this whole division. And then he gets dropped by Rafael Alves, almost finished. And all of a sudden people are like, oh yeah, he's dust now. He's washed. He doesn't look as good, whatever. Like it's just so funny to me where it's like from one fight to the next, it's like somebody's a world beater and then it's like they're absolute dust. Take him out back. It's tent time. It's just kind of funny to me. I never really thought of him as like this superstar prospect. I think he's a solid fighter, and that my opinion of him hasn't really changed. I think he's still solid. You know, he's a very technical striker, doesn't take a lot of chances, but he's very sound defensively, pretty good about limiting damage coming back at him. And he also can mix in the takedowns. He averages just under 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, doesn't show it off in all of his fights, but it goes back to him not taking chances. If he's winning the striking exchanges, he doesn't need to push that grappling pace. The problem in this matchup is the striking, I think, might even favor Kudalate. It's pretty close. I think Ismagulov is a much better boxer, but Kudalate is going to mix in those kicks for sure. But in terms of the grappling, I think that's where the upside is for Ismagulov here. I think he could land takedowns. Matthias Gamrot landed 5 takedowns against Kudalate despite getting dropped in that fight. And let's not forget, Kudalate's getting a ton of love this week. He didn't even think he won that fight against Gamrot. I didn't think he won it either. After they awarded it to him, he's like, this is not my fight. This is your fight, whatever. So for what that's worth, you know, I didn't think Kudalate won that fight, and I don't know if he's getting as much buzz as he is this week if he didn't get awarded that decision. And I think all the upside is really on the side of Ismagulov. It's just a question of if he's going to push a grappling style pace, mix in the takedowns, and take some of the power out of Kudalate. And I think he can do that here. So give me Ismagulov. Ismagulov by decision is the official pick. Next fight up, we have Albert Jurayev coming in as a minus 225 favorite. The comeback on Joaquin Buckley is plus 185 here, and Jurayev is a guy who I specifically remember. I was at Fight Island for UFC 267, and I remember thinking coming away from that fight against Kopylov in that Jurayev is not that good, and this is a potential fade candidate moving forward. And I had him parlayed that night at UFC 267, did hit the parlay, by the way. So shout out to him, but it did get dicey in that fight. He was dropped in round 2 in that fight. The wrestling for a guy who made a living on the regional scene, just taking the guys down and just brutalizing them on the mat. The takedowns did not come easy. He did not look as good in terms of the wrestling. 1 for 9 on the takedowns. Now, when he did get in favorable position in round 2, very dominant on top, stayed in control, vicious ground and pound. All of those things are great, but it was just the fact that the takedowns were so difficult for him and the cardio did not hold up. You know, you saw him start to fade. He's very hittable on the feet as well, which is a concern against a power puncher like Joaquin Buckley, who has 10 knockouts on his record. Obviously, he's most well known for the Impa Kasaganai highlight reel knockout a couple years ago. But outside of the punching power for Buckley, there's not really much to fall back on because he's not going to throw a ton of volume out there. He's not going to wrestle. He's not going to grapple. So it's like, if he's not knocking you out, this guy can be had. And his takedown defense is only 40%. And that's what I keep going back to is like, I do think Jurayev is a future potential fade candidate here, but just not in this matchup because Buckley, I just think the takedowns are going to be there for Jurayev. And that's when he's at his best, is if the takedowns are not going to come as difficult and he does take you down and does get in good positions, that's where I think he can cruise. So even though I think Jurayev is a guy that I'm not super excited about in terms of his future, I just think in this matchup, it favors him stylistically. So I'm going to have to go with him on Saturday. Next up in the welterweight division, we have Kevin Holland, a minus 260 favorite. The comeback on Tim Means is plus 210. And this one's pretty straightforward to me. It's like, how do you beat Kevin Holland? Well, you take him down, you control him on the mat. The problem is Tim Means averages less than 1 takedown per 15 minutes. We cannot trust him, even though he has the skill set to implement some wrestling. I just don't trust him to do that. So I have to expect this is going to play out primarily on the feet. And on the feet, I think Holland's going to have a massive speed advantage. Holland's a much better counter striker. His counter striking is going to be big here. He's got a 6-inch reach advantage as well. And then the durability. Kevin Holland is historically very durable. Tim Means has been finished quite a few times over the course of his career. Now at 38 years old, another 38-year-old fighter that we need to be concerned about the durability here. So I think Holland gets the better of him in what should be a striking match for as long as it lasts. So give me Holland by knockout, and he's a pretty solid spend option this week on DraftKings. And next fight up, we have Donald Cerrone going up against Joe Lozon here. 2 UFC veterans, legends of the sport. They were supposed to fight like a month ago, and it ended up Cerrone at the last minute said he was sick. I believe it was after the fight had already started, or at least it wasn't announced until the first fight had started, because it locked on DraftKings. I had a ton of exposure to this fight. It screwed me and a bunch of other people. It was one of those fun slates where we all just got zeros on some popular fighters here. But in terms of the matchup, it's kind of tough to break down because both guys are kind of washed at this point, as blunt as that is to say. But I do think there's at least paths for each guys here. Like Cerrone obviously would need to avoid getting knocked out early. Joe Lozon historically comes out very hot out of the gate trying to kill people early. He can certainly do that against Cerrone. Cerrone, that's how he's been knocked out multiple times within the first couple rounds. He's 0-5-1 over his last 6 fights. So seeing him as a favorite is pretty concerning. But if Lozon can't get him out of there in the first round, I do think this would favor Cerrone in terms of the better minute winning potential here. He's a much better counter striker. I think it favors him on the feet over 15 minutes. And in terms of the grappling, he's historically very difficult to out grapple, especially if the gas tank of Lozon outside of round 1 tends to fade a little bit. So I like Cerrone. It's kind of a hot take. I like Cerrone by decision. I know a lot of people are expecting a finish in this fight. I wouldn't be surprised. Both guys have been finished a ton, and both guys are capable of finishing, but I could just see this one being where both guys have a lot of moments and maybe there's a couple almost finishes, but then it ends up going 15 minutes. And if that's the case, then I like Donald Cerrone here. Which brings us to our main event, where we have Calvin Kattar, a -235 favorite, going up against Josh Emmett on the comeback at +190. And I really like Calvin Kattar in this spot. Shocker. I like Calvin Kattar like I always do. He's one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. But honestly, I just really like him in this matchup too. Coming into the week, my bias aside, I actually thought, maybe the line's potentially a little bit wide. Maybe I can play Josh Emmett here. And after digging into the matchup, I couldn't be more confident on the Calvin Kattar side for a couple reasons. For starters, yes, Emmett has the big right hand, the power right hand. He's knocked out 3 of his last 5 wins have come by knockout. He's obviously got the power, right? Nobody's denying that. But now he's facing a guy in Calvin Kattar who's historically one of the toughest guys, not just in the division, but across the UFC. He's never been knocked out in his career. He ate almost 450 significant strikes from Max Holloway and still didn't get knocked out. And that was brutal damage. I was even hoping for them to throw in the towel, stop killing my guy out there. But he bounced back in a big win against Giga Chikadze, beat Giga at his own game in terms of the striking. He's just a very good boxer, an excellent striker. He's got a great jab, one of the best jabs in the UFC. He's going to be much longer than Josh Emmett here. He's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage. But also in that Chikadze fight, he showed off the wrestling. The fight IQ is always on point for Calvin Kattar as well. And then the last thing I'll say is Josh Emmett has never been 5 rounds. Calvin Kattar's last 3 fights have all been main event fights here. So I just really favor Kattar in pretty much every aspect, as long as he doesn't get dropped by the big right hand of Josh Emmett. And we really have no reason to believe that his durability has fallen off even after that fight against Max Holloway. Like I said, he fought well against Giga Chikadze his last time out, got the win there as a pretty big sizable underdog. So give me Calvin Kattar, and I don't mind him as an anchor to those parlays this weekend. And as always, guys, you could find the rest of my content at fightnumbers.com. I'll have DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier, ownership projections as well, along with line movement page, fantasy points per minute. It's all completely free. Fightnumbers.com. Check it out. I definitely appreciate it, guys. Best of luck, and we'll see you next time.